In the sun-drenched deserts of Arizona, where the mountains meet the vast sky, lived a woman named Ayanna. She was part of the Apache tribe, a group known for their bravery and deep connection to the land. Ayanna was a symbol of strength in her community. She was not only respected for her wisdom, but also for her skills in survival, hunting, and healing. She was a daughter of the earth and knew the desert like the back of her hand. It was a time of great tension between the Native American tribes and the settlers. The land, once free and open to all, had become a battleground. The settlers wanted to take more and more of the land, and the Native American tribes fought to protect their homes, their culture, and their way of life. Ayanna and her people were caught in the middle of this conflict. One day, while Ayanna was out gathering herbs near the edge of the forest, a group of men appeared. They were not friendly. They were bounty hunters, men who made their living by capturing Native Americans and selling them for a reward. They had come for Ayanna. She had heard of these men before, people who had no respect for the land or its people, driven only by greed. Ayanna, who had always been quick and agile, tried to run. She knew the terrain better than anyone, and she had a head start. But the bounty hunters were faster than she had expected. They chased her for miles through the rocky hills and across the dry plains. She could hear their heavy breathing behind her, but she didn't dare look back. Her heart raced, her legs ached, but she pushed on, determined to escape. Unfortunately, Ayanna wasn't fast enough. As the sun began to set, she found herself surrounded. The men closed in on her, their horses kicking up dust as they rode closer. There was nowhere to hide. She had been caught. The bounty hunters dragged her to the ground, tying her hands and feet with rough, harsh ropes. Ayanna fought back, but there were too many of them and they were too strong. They gagged her to stop her from yelling, and one of the men kicked her in the side, causing her to collapse on the hard ground. "We'll take her with us," one of the men said, his voice cold and indifferent. But another man, the leader of the group, had a different idea. He had heard of a cruel practice, one that many bounty hunters used to lure wild animals, especially wolves. They would tie a person to a tree, leaving them exposed to the dangers of the wilderness, knowing that predators would come. The wolves would be drawn by the smell of the person's fear, and once the wolves attacked, the hunters could capture them. It was a horrible, barbaric plan, but it was a plan that would bring in more money. "We'll leave her here tied to this tree," the leader said. "When the wolves come, we'll deal with them. But first we wait." And so they tied Ayanna to a large, gnarled tree in the middle of the desert. Her arms and legs were bound so tightly that her skin began to bruise and the ropes dug into her flesh. They left her there, exposed to the scorching sun during the day and the cold desert winds at night. The men walked away, laughing among themselves as they set up camp nearby, knowing that Ayanna would be at the mercy of the wolves. But Ayanna was not one to give up easily. Though her body was tired and her strength was fading, her spirit was as strong as ever. She knew that if she didn't act soon, the wolves would come and she would not survive. With all the determination she could muster, Ayanna struggled against the ropes. She twisted her wrists trying to loosen the knots, but the ropes were too tight. She couldn't break free. Her mind raced as she thought of a plan. She knew that the desert was full of dangers, but she also knew it better than anyone. The wolves were cunning and dangerous, but Ayanna had survived the desert for years, and she had learned how to use it to her advantage. As the sun began to set, the air grew cooler and Ayanna's mind focused on one thought: survival. She had to find a way to get free. The men may have thought they were clever, but they had underestimated her. They had underestimated the strength of her people, the Apache. She glanced around, studying her surroundings. The tree she was tied to stood in the middle of a dry wash, surrounded by boulders and small bushes. It was an open area, perfect for setting a trap, but first she needed to escape. The ropes that bound her were strong, but they weren't invincible. Ayanna had spent years learning how to survive in the harshest conditions, and she knew how to use her surroundings to her advantage. As she struggled, she noticed a small rock near her feet. It wasn't much, but it was sharp, and it might be enough to cut through the ropes if she could reach it. Using her legs and her shoulders, she shifted her body until she was able to bring the rock close enough. It was difficult. Her arms were bound tightly and she had no strength left, but slowly, painfully, she dragged the rock toward her wrists. It was a slow process, but she didn't give up. She couldn't afford to. Hours passed and the men around their campfire didn't notice her efforts. The sound of the desert wind and the occasional caw of a raven were the only sounds breaking the stillness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ayana's wrists were free, the ropes fell away, and she used her newly freed hands to untie her feet. Her body ached and she was exhausted, but she knew she couldn't rest. Not yet. She stood up slowly, her legs weak, but she took a deep breath and steadied herself. Ayana's heart pounded as she took her first steps away from the tree. She couldn't let the men know she was free. If they discovered her escape, they would be after her again. And this time they wouldn't be so merciful. With quiet, careful movements, she made her way through the desert night. Her body ached, her throat was dry, and her mind was clouded with exhaustion, but Ayana didn't stop. She knew that her only chance for survival lay in the miles of desert stretching ahead. The men might have left her tied to a tree, but they had underestimated her. She was more than just a prisoner. She was a warrior, and she would not be left behind. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Ayana vanished into the desert. Her story was far from over, and she would do whatever it took to survive. The desert was quiet at dawn. The winds had died down, and the only sound was the distant call of a raven flying high above the rugged landscape. Sam Carter, a cowboy with weathered hands and a heart as tough as the land he called home, rode his horse through the morning haze. He had spent his life moving between ranches in the Southwest, never staying in one place for too long. The wide open spaces, the quiet solitude of the desert, were what he sought. A former soldier in the Indian Wars, Sam had grown tired of the violence and conflict. He wasn't one to get involved in the troubles between the settlers and native tribes anymore. All he wanted was peace. Sam wasn't a man who believed in fate or destiny, but that morning something was different. As he rode his horse across the rocky terrain, something in the air felt off. His senses, sharpened by years of living in the wild, told him that danger was near. It was then that he spotted something unusual in the distance: movement. At first he thought it was just the wind stirring the dry brush, but as he got closer, he saw her. She was a figure tied to a tree, her arms bound behind her, struggling against the ropes. Sam's eyes narrowed as he approached, squinting against the harsh sunlight. The woman was covered in dust and her clothes were torn. Her face, though bruised and tired, still held a fierce, defiant look. She was a Native American woman, and Sam immediately recognized the markings of the Apache tribe on her clothing. He slowed his horse to a halt, his heart racing. This wasn't right. No one should be left in the desert like this. No one deserved to be treated this way, not even in a world as cruel as this one. Sam knew he had to make a choice: ride away and pretend he hadn't seen her, or help her even though he knew it could mean trouble for him. His mind raced. He wasn't a fool. He knew the risks. Helping a Native American, especially an Apache woman, could bring the wrath of the law and even the settlers. But something inside him told him that he couldn't just leave her there. It wasn't about politics or war. It was about right and wrong. He dismounted from his horse, his boots crunching on the dry earth. Ayana, though weak, noticed the cowboy approaching. Her eyes, still sharp despite her exhaustion, watched him closely. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The ropes around her mouth kept her silent. But her eyes told a story, one of hardship, survival, and strength. Sam felt a pang of sympathy, but he couldn't let that cloud his judgment. He knelt down beside her, inspecting the ropes. He could hear her shallow breathing, see the dust caked on her face and the bruises on her wrists where the ropes had cut into her skin. Sam knew she had been through hell. With steady hands, he began to work on the ropes, cutting them with his knife. Ayana flinched at first, but she didn't resist. She knew he was there to help her, even if she didn't understand why. When the ropes fell away, Sam gently helped her to her feet. She was weak, her legs trembling beneath her. He didn't speak at first. There was no need for words. Ayana didn't look at him with fear, though she was wary. There was a look in her eyes, a look of quiet gratitude. Sam didn't wait for her to thank him. He was a cowboy, a man used to working with animals and people, but never with much fanfare. He didn't need recognition. What mattered was getting her to safety. "Can you ride?" Sam asked, his voice low and steady. Ayana shook her head slightly. She was too weak to ride a horse. Sam wasn't surprised. He knew it would take more than just a moment for her to recover. Without a word, Sam gently lifted her onto his horse, making sure she was secure before he mounted up behind her. For a moment, the two of them sat in silence. The only sound, the soft hooves of Sam's horse moving through the dust. Sam didn't ask questions. He didn't need to know her story. The fact that she was alive and that he had found her was enough. They traveled through the desert for hours, moving slowly at first so that Ayanna could recover from her ordeal. Sam offered her water from his canteen, but she took only small sips. Her mind seemed distant, as though she was lost in thought, trying to piece together what had happened. Sam didn't push her. He knew that in times like these, words were often unnecessary. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the heat of the desert became almost unbearable. Sam had learned to live with it, but he knew that it was harder on Ayanna. She had suffered enough already. He kept his eyes on the horizon, knowing that he couldn't afford to stop for too long. As the day wore on, the landscape shifted from the open plains to more rugged terrain. Sam guided his horse through narrow canyons and over rocky hills, trying to stay out of sight of any potential trouble. He wasn't sure who had left Ayanna in the desert or why they had done it, but he knew he had to get her to safety before anyone realized she was gone. At nightfall, they set up camp in a small sheltered cave near a creek. Sam started a small fire, keeping the flames low so they wouldn't be visible from a distance. He unpacked some dried meat and shared it with Ayanna, though she didn't eat much. Her appetite had not returned, but her eyes were starting to show a glimmer of life again. She had been through so much, and yet there was something about her, something fierce, something unbreakable, that intrigued Sam. As the stars began to twinkle in the vast, dark sky above, Sam sat by the fire, watching Ayanna as she rested. He wondered what had brought her to this point. What had she endured before he found her? The mystery of her past didn't matter to Sam. What mattered was that she was safe now, at least for the moment. The crackle of the fire was the only sound as they both sat in silence. Sam didn't know what the future held for them. He didn't know where Ayanna would go or what she would do. But one thing was clear: he wasn't going to leave her behind. Not now, not ever. In a world full of violence and fear, Sam had made a choice. He would stand by her side no matter what the world threw at them. And so, under the vast, starry sky of the desert, a cowboy and an Apache woman, two strangers brought together by fate, began an unlikely journey. Neither of them knew what lay ahead, but they both understood one thing: sometimes doing what's right doesn't require a reason. It only requires courage. The desert was a harsh and unforgiving place, but for Ayanna and Sam, it was the only refuge they had. The sun beat down relentlessly during the day, and the cool desert nights brought only brief relief. Ayanna, though still weakened by her ordeal, had begun to regain some strength. The days they spent traveling together allowed Sam to learn more about her. Though she spoke little, her eyes told a story of survival, loss, and strength. Sam had always known the desert to be a place of isolation, but now it seemed as though it had become a place of connection. His life, one he had lived alone for so long, now seemed to find purpose in helping Ayanna. Sam didn't ask her questions. He didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, even if it was marked by the tension of their uncertain journey ahead. Every day he kept his eyes on the horizon, always alert for signs of danger. He wasn't foolish enough to think they had escaped the worst. The bounty hunters would surely come looking for her, and they would stop at nothing to find her. Their first few days together had been tense, but they had slowly learned to rely on each other. Sam was patient with Ayanna, letting her rest when she needed to, and he made sure she drank enough water to keep her strength up. In return, Ayanna began to watch him, learning his ways. She had been raised in the desert, but Sam knew things that she did not: his knowledge of the land, the weather, and the dangers that lurked in the wild. As the days passed, Ayanna began to recover her strength, and Sam began to realize just how skilled she was. Though she was still weak, Ayanna had never given up. The same spirit that had kept her alive when she was tied to the tree in the desert was still inside her. She had learned to survive in the harshest conditions. Even without the strength she once had, she was still capable of remarkable things. Sam had begun to see this. When they came upon a dry creek bed one afternoon, Ayanna had spotted a small patch of cactus fruit. While Sam was preparing to move on, she had carefully collected the fruit and shared it with him. It was a small gesture, but it reminded him that she was far from helpless. One morning, as the sun crept over the horizon, Sam and Ayanna came to a decision point. They had been traveling for several days now, moving further into the wilderness to avoid any possible encounters with settlers or bounty hunters. But they both knew the longer they stayed in one place, the more likely they were to be found. Sam had been thinking of taking her to a nearby ranch where he had once worked. It was a small place, far from any major settlements, and it was likely to be safe for a while. But Ayana didn't want to hide. "I can't stay hidden forever," she said quietly one evening as they sat by the fire. It was the first time she had spoken in days. "My people will come for me. They will help me. I cannot live in hiding." Sam had known this, of course. He had seen the strength in her eyes from the first moment he found her. But he also knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. They would have to face the dangers of the desert, and the bounty hunters would be hunting them both. "I understand," Sam replied, his voice low. He had never been one to shy away from hard work or difficult decisions, but this felt different. Ayana wasn't just a woman he had found in the desert. She had become something more. She had become a person he respected and cared for. "We'll keep moving. We'll find a way." The next few days were spent preparing for what was to come. They needed to find more food, more water, and most importantly, a safe place to hide. Ayana was still not fully recovered, but she was getting stronger. Sam could see the fire in her eyes, the will to survive. It was this fire that would help her push through the hardships of the desert. And it was this fire that Sam admired. They traveled through narrow canyons and over rocky hills, always keeping an eye out for any signs of danger. Sam had grown used to the harsh desert terrain over the years, but this time, he wasn't alone. Ayana's presence beside him was a constant reminder of the danger they faced. He couldn't afford to be careless. Every decision he made, every step they took, mattered more than ever before. As they approached a small range of hills, Ayana's sharp eyes noticed something in the distance. "There," she said, pointing. Sam squinted into the distance and saw a figure, a rider on horseback. It was too far to tell who it was, but Sam didn't need to guess. He knew it was either a settler or one of the bounty hunters. Either way, it wasn't someone they wanted to meet. "Get down," Sam whispered urgently. He pulled Ayana down behind a large rock, keeping low to the ground. The rider continued toward them, unaware of their presence. Sam's heart raced as he watched the figure approach, but there was nothing he could do. He couldn't let the rider see them. The figure came closer, and Sam's breath caught in his throat. It was one of the bounty hunters. He recognized the man's hat and the way he rode. The bounty hunter was scanning the horizon, his eyes searching for any sign of Ayana. Sam held his breath, praying the man wouldn't see them. The rider passed by, and Sam waited for what seemed like an eternity before he allowed himself to relax. They had avoided detection for now, but Sam knew that this was only a temporary victory. The bounty hunters were out there, and they wouldn't stop until they found Ayana. Ayana, still crouched beside Sam, looked at him with gratitude in her eyes. She knew they couldn't keep running forever. She needed to find a way to return to her people, to her tribe. But for now, the desert was their refuge. Sam had saved her life once, and he was willing to do it again. He had made it clear that he wouldn't leave her behind. And Ayana, though proud and fierce, was beginning to trust him in a way she had never trusted anyone before. In that moment, as they sat in the shelter of the rocks, both of them knowing the dangers that lay ahead, there was a bond forming, unspoken but undeniable. It was a bond forged in the fires of survival, one that neither would ever forget. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for now, Sam and Ayana had each other. And together, they would face whatever challenges the desert had to offer. They weren't alone anymore. The desert stretched out before them like an endless sea of sand and stone. But for Sam and Ayana, it was more than just a harsh landscape. It was their lifeline. Every day they moved cautiously, always staying one step ahead of the bounty hunters who were hot on their trail. The sun seemed to hang low in the sky, casting long shadows over the barren earth as Sam and Ayana made their way through the rugged hills, knowing that the further they traveled, the more dangerous it would become. Sam had always been good at reading the land, at noticing small signs that others might overlook. Fresh footprints in the sand, broken branches on the trail, a faint movement in the distance. He had survived in the wild for years, but he had never been so desperate to escape. He didn't need to be told that the bounty hunters were closing in on them. The growing sense of urgency in the air was enough to make his every instinct scream at him to keep moving. For Ayana, it was more than just survival. It was a fight for her life, for the freedom of her people, and for the chance to return to the land that was hers by birthright. Every day that passed was a day closer to the moment when she would be free again, but she also knew that freedom was not guaranteed. The bounty hunters would not stop until they found her, and she had no doubt they would stop at nothing to make that happen. On the fourth day since their narrow escape, The situation became even more perilous. The heat of the day was unbearable, and the terrain grew steeper and more difficult to navigate. As they crested a ridge, Sam's sharp eyes spotted something that made his heart race. Dust. It was far off, but it was moving in their direction, and Sam knew immediately that it was a group of men on horseback. Ayanna noticed the look in Sam's eyes and followed his gaze. She didn't need to ask who they were. The bounty hunters had found them. "Stay low," Sam instructed, his voice quiet but firm. He guided Ayanna off the trail and into a small canyon that had been carved by centuries of wind and water. The shadows here would hide them, but only for so long. Sam knew they had to move fast. They descended into the canyon, the narrow walls of rock on either side offering some cover. Sam moved quickly but with care, guiding Ayanna as they scrambled down the uneven ground. The desert was unforgiving, and the canyon floor was littered with loose rocks and sharp stones that could easily cause an injury. Ayanna, though still weak from her time in captivity, moved with surprising agility, her instincts guiding her as she followed Sam through the rough terrain. The sound of hooves grew louder, and Sam's heart pounded in his chest. He could hear the bounty hunters' voices now, their shouts growing closer as they rode toward the canyon. They were getting closer, and Sam knew that they wouldn't stop until they had Ayanna back in their grasp. "We need to move faster," Sam muttered, more to himself than to Ayanna. He had always been good at staying one step ahead, but now, with the bounty hunters so close, it was becoming harder to find safe places to hide. The canyon they were in was a dead end, and they had no choice but to find another way out. Ayanna looked around, her eyes scanning the canyon walls. She had been raised in the desert, and her knowledge of the land was as deep as Sam's. There was a narrow path up the side of the canyon, barely visible from below, but it was their only chance. Without a word, she pointed to the path, and Sam nodded, understanding immediately. They began to climb, using the rough edges of the canyon walls to find their footing. It wasn't easy, and the climb was exhausting, but they had no time to waste. The sound of the approaching riders was almost deafening now, and Sam could hear the occasional shout as they closed in. He pushed himself harder, feeling the burn in his legs but refusing to stop. At the top of the canyon, Sam helped Ayanna over the final ledge and onto a small plateau that overlooked the valley below. The view was breathtaking, but there was no time to appreciate it. They had made it to the top just in time. Sam could see the bounty hunters now, riding into the canyon below, unaware that their prey had escaped. "Keep moving," Sam whispered urgently. They were not safe yet. The plateau was rocky and barren, but it offered them a good vantage point. Sam knew they needed to find cover before the bounty hunters realized they had been tricked. He spotted a series of large boulders further up the slope, their jagged edges providing a natural hiding place. Without hesitation, he started moving toward them. Urging Ayanna to keep up, they crouched behind the rocks, holding their breath as the bounty hunters rode past the mouth of the canyon, completely unaware of the two figures hidden just above them. Sam felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was short-lived. They were not out of danger yet. The bounty hunters might not have seen them, but they were still out there, searching for any trace of their quarry. They waited for what felt like hours, watching the bounty hunters as they circled the canyon below, trying to find any sign of Ayanna's escape. Sam knew it was only a matter of time before they would return, more determined than ever to catch up. He had no illusions that they had won yet. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the desert, Sam made a decision. They couldn't stay hidden forever. If they did, the bounty hunters would eventually find them. They needed to keep moving to put as much distance between themselves and their pursuers as possible. "Come on," Sam said softly, rising from behind the rocks. "We need to get to the ridge. We'll have a better chance of staying ahead of them if we move under the cover of darkness." Ayanna nodded, her face set with determination. She wasn't going to let fear stop her now. She had come too far, fought too hard to be free, and she wasn't about to give up. They began their descent down the other side of the plateau, moving swiftly and quietly under the cover of night. The desert was eerily silent now, and the shadows stretched long across the landscape. Sam kept his eyes peeled for any sign of danger, but the only sounds were the soft crunch of sand beneath their feet and the occasional call of an owl in the distance. As they moved forward, Sam and Ayanna both knew that they had barely escaped the danger. The bounty hunters were still out there, and they would stop at nothing to track them down. But Sam wasn't ready to give up. He had promised Ayanna that he wouldn't leave her behind, and he meant it. Together they would keep running, keep fighting until they were free. The chase was far from over. But for now they had won a small victory, and that was enough. They would face the next challenge when it came. But as the desert night surrounded them, they knew they had each other, and that gave them the strength to keep going. The desert night was still, its vast emptiness stretching out beneath a sky full of stars. Sam and Ayanna had been traveling for hours, moving quietly through the dark, their eyes always scanning for danger. The cold air of the night was a welcome relief from the scorching heat of the day, but it brought with it a sense of urgency. They couldn't afford to stop for long. The bounty hunters were still out there, relentlessly searching for Ayanna, and Sam knew they had to keep moving if they were to escape for good. As they crept through the desert, their goal was simple: survival. They needed to find a safe place to rest, somewhere far from the hunters and the danger that had been chasing them for days. Sam had been leading them toward a small hidden valley he knew well, far from the main trails, a place so remote that it was unlikely anyone would find them there. Ayanna, though still recovering from the brutal days of captivity and the long journey, was determined. Her spirit had not been broken. She had endured too much to give up now. Despite the physical exhaustion that clung to her, there was a fire in her eyes that refused to die out. She had fought for her freedom, and she would continue to fight for it no matter what. As they reached the edge of the valley, Sam allowed himself a small breath of relief. This place, nestled between two large rock formations, was sheltered from the wind and hidden from view. The only way in or out was through a narrow pass, and Sam knew the area like the back of his hand. He had spent time there years ago, working with a small group of cowboys who had used the valley as a retreat. He'd always remembered how peaceful it had been, and it was the perfect place for them to rest. They set up camp near the entrance, the warmth of a small fire offering comfort in the chilly desert night. Sam had been careful to keep the flames low, aware that even a small fire could be seen from miles away in the clear desert air. But for now they were safe. Ayanna sat by the fire, the flickering light casting soft shadows on her face. She looked tired, but there was something in her posture, something in the way she held herself that told Sam she wasn't ready to give up. Sam had always been a man of few words. He wasn't the type to talk much, especially about feelings or anything personal. He had spent most of his life alone, drifting from place to place, finding comfort in the quiet, empty stretches of the land. But something about Ayanna made him want to speak, to explain himself, to offer her something more than just a place to rest. "You've been through a lot," Sam said quietly, his voice almost lost in the wind. "I know that, but I need you to know something. I'm not leaving you behind. Not now, not ever." Ayanna turned her gaze to him, her eyes tired but steady. She didn't speak at first, as though considering his words. Sam had been honest with her from the start, never pretending that everything would be easy. But he had made a promise, and now, as they sat together in the quiet of the desert, he realized that promise had become more than just words. "I know," Ayanna replied softly, her voice carrying the weight of everything she had experienced. She looked out toward the desert where the night was dark and endless. "I know you won't leave me, and I don't think I could have made it this far without you." The words were simple, but to Sam they meant more than anything else. Ayanna had been through so much, captured, abandoned, hunted, but she had not lost her will to fight. And now, she had found something else, something she hadn't expected in the midst of all the chaos: trust. They sat in silence for a moment, the crackling fire the only sound between them. Sam didn't need to say anything more. The bond between them was unspoken, but it was real. Ayanna had been raised to survive alone, to fight for herself and her people. But now she understood something else. She had never asked for help, but Sam had given it to her without hesitation. In return, she had come to realize that survival wasn't just about strength. It was also about the bonds we form with others, the trust we place in those who choose to stand beside us. Over the next few days, they rested and regrouped, recovering from the dangers they had faced. The desert, while still a harsh place, had become a temporary sanctuary for them. They shared stories, small ones at first, the kind that people tell when they don't know each other well. But as the days passed, the stories grew deeper. Ayanna spoke of her childhood, her family, and the land she had known all her life. Sam spoke of his time as a soldier, of the endless battles and the toll they had taken on him. It wasn't easy for him to open up, but with Ayanna he found he didn't mind. She had become more than just a woman he had saved from captivity. She had become a companion, someone who understood the world in the same way he did. As they spent time together, their bond grew stronger. Sam taught Ayanna how to use a rifle with more precision, and Ayanna taught Sam how to track game and navigate by the stars, skills she had learned from her people. They were learning from each other, and in doing so, they were creating something new. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the air crisp and cool, Sam looked out toward the horizon. The desert had never felt more peaceful, but he knew the danger was still out there. The bounty hunters would never stop looking for Ayanna, and Sam knew they couldn't stay in the valley forever. "We can't stay here," Sam said, his voice quiet but certain. "It's too dangerous. But I know a place, a town far from here. We can get you the help you need." Ayanna nodded, her expression thoughtful. And after that, Sam didn't answer right away. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. Ayanna had become a part of his life, and he wasn't going to let anything tear that apart. After that, he said finally, "We'll figure it out together." In that moment, Ayanna smiled. A small, quiet smile, but one that held a depth of meaning. They had come so far. They had faced the desert, the dangers, and the uncertainty. But now, in the heart of the wilderness, they had found something more. They had found trust, respect, and a bond that would carry them forward. The desert had tried to break them, but instead, it had brought them closer together. And as Sam and Ayanna sat in the glow of the fire, the stars above them and the quiet of the desert surrounding them, they knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The road ahead was uncertain, but they would walk it side by side. Two people from different worlds, united by the struggles they had endured and the bond they had forged in the unforgiving heart of the desert.